Welcome, brave souls, to Fear File Chronicles, your one-way ticket to spine-chilling stories and terrifying tales. Tonight, we'll be diving into the darkest corners of the human mind with the story, Paid For in Blood, penned by the twisted mind of EmpyrealInvective. Together, we'll explore the unexplained and face our deepest fears. But before we begin, if you enjoy trembling and terror, be sure to hit that like button, share this video with your fellow fear fanatics, and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to click the bell notification so you never miss an eerie episode. Your support truly means the world to us, so feel free to leave a comment below to join the Fear File Chronicles community. Now, without further ado, let's unravel the mysteries of the unknown together as we delve into tonight's fear-inducing story, Paid For in Blood. Dim the lights and prepare yourself for a chilling journey into the Fear File Chronicles. A note from the desk of William Mason. The aim of this foreword is to provide some clarity to the Stoker estate on certain troubling sections of the subsequent interview. For brevity's sake, a short description of the events leading up to the interview has been included. I was hired by the Stoker estate to find the crew from the latest expedition. I was to inquire about their negligence, conduct an interview on their failures, and mediate in their service termination. After asking around the Providence area, I came across some information about the possible whereabouts of a certain Mr. Howard. Mr. Howard was a member of Expedition 5A, commissioned by the Stoker family. His selection was based on his knowledge of the nearby town and his disregard for the local rumors about the recently purchased, but long abandoned, Ladd excavation site. The subject of my interview was intercepted from the local police after causing an incident at a Providence bar. Mr. Howard was put into isolation after a violent outburst at the bar led to his expulsion. He was later detained by the police after being seen in a state of disarray and indecency. I was informed of his location and arrived at the police station to negotiate his release in exchange for his account of the expedition. He seemed drowsy and clearly suffering from the previous night's indulgence. At first, he resisted my inquiries, but his resistance faded once I informed him that I was acting on behalf of the Stoker family. It was then that he began to tell his story, the testimonial of Mr. Howard regarding the events of August 20th, 1913.
We departed that morning in high spirits. We were promised a significant reward for minimal work. Our group consisted of myself, Ambrose Derleth, Matthew Campbell, whom I suspect used a false name, and Ramsey Hodgson. We were all recruited for our desperation for work, the promise of easy money, and our familiarity with violence. I had willingly participated in the border war before being called home to attend to family matters. Matthew Campbell seemed to be a mercenary, ready to work for the highest bidder. Ambrose Derleth had little experience, but he showed courage and admiration for my brief military history. As for Ramsey Hodgson, he remained quiet the night before. Instead, he found company at the bar. The cursed Stoker estate gave us a small advance with the promise of full payment upon completion.
At this point, Mr. Howard was advised not to speak ill of his employers. This admonishment did nothing to change his disposition, and instead seemed to agitate him further.
The Honorable estate paid us a meager sum to lead a small expedition to verify the claims made by workers at the Ladd excavation site. We were armed only with basic weapons, a Springfield M1903 rifle with a bayonet from my time on the frontier, a bolo knife, which Campbell claimed was all he needed, or perhaps the only weapon he could use proficiently, and a Colt single-action Army revolver. Ambrose, clearly limited by his financial means, arrived unarmed. He carried a cudgel, likely used on his farm to deal with pests. In the end, our weapons provided little protection against what we encountered in the excavation site's depths. Briefed and equipped, we followed Mr. Hodgson through the woods towards the Ladd excavation site. I regaled Ambrose with stories from my time in the Frontier War. He listened with wide-eyed fascination as Mr. Hodgson watched him with a melancholic smile. He understood the thrill of youthful bravery and the sorrow that so often follows it. On reflection, the woods seemed to have taken on a more sinister tone. Whether this is a result of my experiences or an actual shift in atmosphere, I can't say. But one thing I can state with certainty is that Ambrose observed an unusual amount of mistletoe on the trees, the amount seemingly increasing as we neared our destination. Mr. Hodgson informed us that the esteemed Stoker estate had reported several workers either missing or having fled. With bandits and lawbreakers known to frequent the area, we assumed these people had been ambushed and robbed. A search of the woods, however, revealed no evidence of bandit activity. We found no signs of a camp or anything to support the theory of bandits abducting, ransoming, or robbing travelers or workers. At this point, Matthew Campbell suggested we return to town and claim our reward. Mr. Hodgson strongly disagreed and counter-proposed exploring the excavation site to check for signs of bandits. Mr. Derleth readily supported this suggestion. Like many young men, he believed every situation was an adventure with a heroic ending. He had yet to learn that a fight with thieves would be quick, brutal, and utterly unromantic. A lesson I had already learned. I supported Mr. Hodgson's idea, and as a group, we continued towards the excavation site. Matthew Campbell wasn't pleased with the decision, but knew that if he left now, he would get nothing upon completion of the task. He made it clear he didn't agree with this turn of events. Mr. Derleth, on the other hand, was so thrilled by the prospect that he practically skipped through the woods as we got closer to the accursed site. Throughout the journey, he kept asking Mr. Hodgson and me about our combat experiences. To pass the time, I indulged him with a few stories, which he listened to intently, hanging on to every detail. We set up camp under a tree so dense with mistletoe that the sky was hardly visible through it. The excavation site was eerily quiet. The silence hung over us like a shroud, pleading to be broken. We decided that a lantern would only alert potential miscreants to our presence. So we proceeded into the darkness with only our weapons and our wits. God help us, they were not enough.
At this point, Mr. Howard asked for a drink, but was promptly refused due to his condition. He became silent and refused to continue his story until he was given something to drink. Once a cup of spirits was handed to him, he drained it in a single gulp. Despite the strong liquor, he found no comfort and continued his tale.
The excavation site was wholly uninteresting. It was what you would have expected from an abandoned site. The air was thick with dust and agitated our lungs. We refrained from coughing for fear of giving away our position as we ventured deeper into the darkness. A majority of the mining equipment we found had been haphazardly left strewn about the tunnels. As we proceeded deeper, the area grew darker and more difficult to navigate. Still, we refused to use the lantern until we could ascertain whether or not brigands were abound. The darkness obscured a lot of detail, but I do remember noting that our uncertainty increased the further we ventured into the depths. Our weapons bought us a small measure of comfort, but the darkness was almost oppressive. Whereas most of the party was discouraged by the environment, Mr. Derleth pressed on undaunted, driven by the singular promise of adventure and excitement. Matthew Campbell lingered behind the group with furtive movements, as if preparing to take flight at the slightest hint of danger. Mr. Hodgson pressed on with the grim determination of a veteran. We made progress deeper into the site by clinging to the walls and proceeding with caution. It was here where we came across the depths, purely by accident. Poor Ambrose was the first to discover the descent. His hand slipped into the gap, and he went tumbling down into the darkness with a shocked cry. Mr. Hodgson was the first to react. Without a second thought, he threw himself into the hole and slid to the bottom. I moved next and tried to carefully navigate the treacherous descent down to the other two. By the time I reached them, Ambrose had regained his senses and, with the help of Ramsay, rose to his feet. I surveyed the area around me and noticed that climbing back out of the pit would be a difficult task without rope or means to secure ourselves. I called up to Matthew to tell him we were unharmed and that he needed to find some means to help us extricate ourselves from our predicament. He promised us he would try to find some rope or some other way to help us out. I requested he slide down the lantern so we may try to find some way out, but he stated that he needed the light to search the area. I tried to protest, but by then, the coward had fled and left us in the darkness. Luckily, Mr. Hodgson had a small amount of tinder sticks which could be used to survey our surroundings. He struck the tinder stick and briefly illuminated the pit, which revealed the desperation of our situation. The incline was far too steep to try and ascend with no footholds without risk of falling and badly injuring ourselves. It appeared the excavation had broken through to another cave system while mining the ore out of this one. Before we could make out any more of the area, the light was extinguished by a slight gust. We watched in despair as the flame on one of our few tinders flickered and went out. Our despair was quickly replaced by Mr. Hodgson's insightful nature. He reasoned that this deep in the cave, we shouldn't be subject to air currents, so the fact we had just experienced a warm breeze suggested we were close to an exit. Uplifted by this fortuitous news, we proceeded in the direction of the wind. All thoughts of finding any possible bandits and raising their encampment were forgotten in our search for an exit. We moved slowly through the blackness and groped along the walls to keep on the right track. Ambrose Derleth had suffered a slight sprain in the fall and had a pronounced limp, but our encouragement drove him onwards. We came to the conclusion that we were ill-equipped to deal with our current situation and would need to regroup and request more funding before we were able to mount an effective expedition. Ramsey led the foray into the blackness, armed with only his revolver and a few tinders, with Ambrose trailing behind us. The wind was intermittently blowing and drawing us forward down the winding series of tunnels and further away from the light. We walked in complete darkness for a few minutes with nothing but the steady footfalls of our boots before Ramsey decided to ignite another tinder stick. He fished one out of the carton, and it was upon striking the second tinder stick that he revealed the man standing before us. The man was in such a disheveled state he almost appeared like a wretched wight straight from a cautionary tale. I would have put him to the bayonet of my Springfield M1903 had Ramsey not stayed my hand. The man regarded us with wide eyes that appeared almost black from the dilation of his pupils. His clothes were filthy, and he was no longer wearing boots. He was dreadfully thin and appeared sickly. Ambrose fearfully inquired about his well-being, but the man just looked beyond us with an open mouth as if in shocked awe at something beyond the veil of normal sight. He mouthed words I could not comprehend with a tone and inflection which seemed completely alien to our group. All attempts to rouse him from his trance proved fruitless. His experiences and time in the cave had rendered him semi-catatonic and unaware of the world around him. We reasoned that we had come across one of the reported lost miners who had gotten lost in the depths. His harrowing experience had rendered him dumb and deaf to our inquiries. We tried to coax him to come with us, but he stood transfixed, facing deeper into the tunnel. We eventually decided we didn't have the means to free him from his wretched reverie, and that we would have to return for him later when we had enough men to prepare a makeshift transport for him. One memory of the man sticks with me, which is that he wasn't attired like the local miners who wore thick clothes and cloths around their faces to protect themselves from particulates and dust motes. Instead, this man was outfitted in gear more befitting of a traveler or wanderer. Given that no sane man would wander into a cave of their own volition, this leaves me with one essential inquiry. How many expeditions had been sent there before us?
Mr. Howard's question was evaded, and he was provided with another drink, which he gratefully accepted. He once again drank it in a single motion before continuing on.
We left the catatonic man behind. He refused to be moved closer to the exit where the wind was coming from, and we did not have the numbers to forcibly extricate him from that spot. I promised Ambrose we would return for him once we were able to locate an exit and regroup with Matthew. He assented, and we continued our descent with trepidation steadily welling up inside us. I tried to ignore the fact that the airflow was leading us deeper into the darkness and further underground, But with each passing moment, the realization grew stronger. I told myself that the cave would eventually open up on some lowlands and we could see the sun again. The further down we walked, the more closed the walls became. We started out being unable to reach either side of the walls, to the point where we could touch them with outstretched arms. Soon it shrunk down so much where we had to walk in single file and squeeze through crevices. Still, we pressed onward, following the intermittent puffs of wind, driven by the promise of freedom and light. The smell was hardly discernible at first, but as the earth closed in around us and the darkness grew, it soon became apparent that the odor could not be ignored. Each time the breeze worked its way through the tight channel, it brought with it a singular smell. We were forced to cover our faces with the sleeves of our clothes to try and shield ourselves from the overpowering scents. I cannot forget that malodorous sensation as long as I live. It was the smell of rot. I assumed we had found the remains of the other men. Finally, after squeezing through a path so tight that we had to draw in our breath just to pass through, we came to a large cavern. I wondered if this was the final chamber before the terminus of this excavation site. The wind had now grown in strength, and it buffeted us as we walked further into the abyssal blackness. In the darkness, we could make out something in the center of the chamber amidst a pool of stagnant water.
Mr. Howard grew despondent at this point in the retelling. After a few moments, I decided to ply him with another drink. It took a moment of coaxing, but I was able to convince him to accept this offer. He drank this cup slowly, as if trying to delay the conclusion of his tale. After he finished with the spirits, he pressed on.
We all approached it, curious to figure out what the object was. Mr. Hodgson and Mr. Derleth reached the thing first. In their excitement, at the prospect of a new discovery, they pushed forward into the murky water. It was my hesitation to enter the stagnant water so hastily which saved me the brunt of the horror. As soon as he was within reach of the object, Mr. Hodgson struck the tinder stick and illuminated the room. Words cannot describe the abomination we witnessed, but I will try for the sake of my final request. The thing in the center of the room was a large mass of flesh. It appeared like a tangled, jumbled amalgamation of sinew, skin, and muscle, akin to what a carrion bird might disgorge after gorging itself excessively on the dead. I could distinguish fingers and toes, arms and legs, torsos and heads writhing within the abhorrent conglomerate. The fusion of putrid flesh was encased in a sickly, slick, viscous layer that encapsulated its form. It throbbed with a demonic rhythm, and I believed I could see through the slimy layer of membrane to something inside, but I was too far away. Ambrose, unfortunately, did not share in this distance. Everything seemed to occur in an instant. Ambrose let out a shriek as if a searing hot poker had been driven into his nervous system. Off in the distance, I discerned the sound of voices, alerted by Ambrose's terrified yelling. We were not alone with this monstrosity, and something told me we would not want to encounter the others. Their voices were distant, but I heard enough to identify their ululations and gibbering nonsense as they increased in volume. They sounded almost tribal in nature. The ignited tinder stick was snuffed out by the gust this thing generated with its breathing. Then the true madness began. Ramsay, in response to the sight of the abomination, drew his revolver and fired blindly into its mass. The muzzle flash momentarily illuminated the cavern and revealed something moving underneath the water towards Ramsay in retaliation to his attack. I tried to shout a warning to him, but he was too busy screaming and trying to reload to heed my words. Before he could finish reloading the revolver, a fleshy extension of the monstrous mound of meat ensnared him, pinning his arms down to his torso. I lunged forward into the water, attempting to save my comrade from the amalgamation. I thrust my bayonet into the twisted appendage of tendons, watching it sink in with a nauseating, squelching sound, but it did nothing to weaken its grip on my companion. It held him tight and constricted his movements. A resulting shriek echoed from the mass, and I heard the others howling in sympathy as they hastened to the creature's aid. Ramsay struggled against the flesh as it drew him towards the grotesque mass in the center of the cavern, but it was overwhelmingly powerful. I could do nothing but watch as the tendril pulled him towards the writhing entity and pressed him against the repugnant mass. Ramsay's pleas for help transformed into incoherent screams as the viscous fluid made contact with his skin. Whether the slime was acidic or merely facilitated a sinister osmosis, I can't ascertain. All I know is the palpable agony it inflicted. Ramsay tried to pull himself free, and I watched in terror as the skin on the side of his face sloughed off where it had made contact with the vile substance, but it clung to him and incorporated him deeper into its mass. At this moment, Ambrose reached my side and stood with me before the abomination. Ramsay's military experience had hardened him against such grotesque sights, but Ambrose was woefully unprepared for this tableau of decay, death, and destruction. He was not acquainted with the cloying stench of death, nor the resilience it demanded. His eyes revealed everything. He had witnessed what resided inside the mass, understood the creature's true form, and that revelation shattered his sanity into pieces. He clung to my coat and babbled about eyes. Thousands of eyes inside. He repeated these words ceaselessly as if communicating this to me might offer him some form of solace. I feigned ignorance of his words. I didn't want to know what he had seen that had irrevocably altered him. I tried to extract myself and calm him, but he was far beyond the reaches of sanity and reason. He gripped me tighter and drew me closer to him while struggling to articulate what he had seen. I heard others drawing nearer. Perhaps they were miners or wanderers, or possibly other expeditions dispatched from the august Stoker estate, lured by the promise of riches, oblivious to the fact that their only reward would be reaped in blood and lunacy. Ambrose Derleth had succumbed to their machinations. He was teetering on the brink of the abyss and pulling me with him.
Mr. Howard hesitated at this point, and a pint of beer was offered to him. He looked at the mug for a few moments before continuing his tale without taking a drink.
Ambrose's frantic rants about eyes and twitching mandibles only succeeded in unnerving me and attracting those wretched worshippers to our location. If any of us hoped to survive, we needed to escape immediately while the thing was distracted and the others were yet to surround us. Ambrose, however, refused to release me. He was pulling me deeper into the darkness and desolation of that place. In desperation, I did the only thing I could do. I plunged the bayonet into Ambrose's throat and I ran. God help me, I ran. Ambrose choked out a few words as I slipped free from his grasp. Ignoring his words, I fled back the way I had come. Sprinting through the darkness, bouncing off the walls, I heard the primitive cries of the horde descend upon their god's chamber. I tried to disregard the sounds of struggling and screaming, but they penetrated my ears regardless. I wondered how those frenzied lunatics survived in such close proximity to that malevolent mass, and a horrifying realization struck me. It let them live. Everything requires sustenance, the fleshy shell. Encasing the thing, it was akin to a cocoon, almost embryonic. It needed them. Most of my fingernails snapped off as I climbed out of the pit back into the mine, but I was too frantic to care at that moment. All I remember is running, with the sound of their pursuing footsteps and their delirious ramblings echoing in the darkness. I passed Matthew, who was trying to fend off several of the psychotic worshippers who had ambushed him, but their numbers were too great, and I was in no condition to assist. Reduced to a cowardly child, I could only hide in the darkness as the madmen fell upon Matthew and dragged him towards the cavern. They were drenched in sweat and disheveled, their skin riddled with bite marks and patches of missing flesh. They babbled incoherent words to each other that only they could understand as they subdued Matthew. Once I was certain they had passed, I continued fleeing. I could hear them behind me, searching the darkness and cackling. What happened to Matthew? I do not know. Perhaps he is still down there, gibbering and driven mad by the things he will be forced to witness. He may have been an uncouth and unsavory character, but no one deserves to suffer such a fate. Free from the horrors of that expedition, I could do nothing but try to come to terms with my cowardly and craven actions. The worst thing that haunts me still was Ambrose's words as I stuck my bayonet into the hollow of his throat. I couldn't hear him clearly, but his words sounded something like, "Thank you." No, that is not right. His final words were not "thank you." They were not appreciation for sparing him from the madness and giving him the only mercy I had. No, his words were, "How could you? How could you fill my head with tales of heroics and adventure? How could you not help Ramsay Hodgson? How could you lead us into this horrible place? How could you do this to me? How could you run?" He is right. I have done those things, and the only thing that brings me any solace is drink. I think the only hope any of us has now lies in the Stoker estate. Please intimate this message to Mr. Stoker. Cease all exploration into that place. Nothing good will come of it. Blast the entrance, and leave the incubating thing down there to famine. Let it starve and save us all the horror it will release once its enshot embryo is done gestating. For all of our sakes, do this.
A final note from the desk of William Machine. After speaking those words, Mr. Howard became non-communicative. As per our negotiation, bail was offered and he was released. As per his uncouth upbringing, he did not extend gratitude or make eye contact with me. He only repeated his request that we cease all exploration and dynamite the entrance to the mine. He left after those words, likely in the direction of the nearest pub. What became of him after this point, I do not know, nor do I wish to know. While I do not place any value in the words of Mr. Howard, I would like to offer a suggestion to the venerable head of the Stoker estate. The other expeditions which have been sent out have yet to return. It is extremely unlikely that there is any truth to his fantastical tale, but there may be some prudence in deciding to suspend all excavation and exploration until we can muster a large group to discover the truth of what happened to the 15 miners and the 4 previous expeditions sent. As a mediator, I can only advise that you utilize your best judgment and evaluate the transcripts I have attached.
Telegraph response from the Stoker estate. Believe not the tales of superstitious locals, Mr. Mackin. They are irrational simpletons who see shapes and shadows and weave fantastical tales. There are valuable minerals to be had in the Lad mine. Expedition shall continue as long as I have the funding and men boast of their curiosity. I am willing to pay any price necessary to continue with mining operations.
Well, my friends, we've reached the end of tonight's chilling tale, paid for in blood, by the talented EmpyrealInvective. I hope you've enjoyed our descent into darkness, and that you'll carry a piece of the Fear File Chronicles with you as you drift into uneasy dreams. If our story left you shivering and shaking, don't forget to like this video, share it with others who crave a good scare, and subscribe to the Fear File Chronicles for more haunting horrors. Remember to hit the bell notification so you're always among the first to know when a new nightmare awaits. As always, we appreciate your support and would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Sharing your fears and frights with us truly means a lot, so don't be shy to engage with our sinister community. Until next time, remember to embrace the darkness, for it is within the shadows that our most terrifying stories are born. Good night, and stay scared.